Okay, so for my case presentation, I was going to do this on a client that we had gotten a referral to see for services. So the first thing, I guess, the key events were the referral for client services, need for dependable primary caregiver, which I'll also refer to as the PCG. Potentially, the primary caregiver that was there was visibly high on drugs. The home was in complete disarray, and we found out during this visit that there was a possible new resident moving into the home that was an associate of the PCG, possibly, and there was some question on whether or not this associate would also be a drug user. So, while doing the referral visit for new client services, the social worker, the nurse, and the intern went to the home to meet with the potential client, the primary caregiver. The power of attorney was not present, but the potential primary caregiver gave her a call, not anyone on the care team, and got her on the phone, and she okayed the situation, said that she was fine with services, and that the granddaughter who lived in the home with the grandmother, the client, was okay for services. So there was really nothing in writing from the from the power of attorney stating that services were okay. It was just a conversation had on the other end of a phone. So when we arrived, the granddaughter was visibly high on something. There were numerous signs of it. She could not concentrate. She really couldn't talk. There were issues with her mentally understanding things, a lot of gnawing on her mouth, scratching, really thin, several visible signs that she was more than like couldn't make eye contact, that she was pretty high on something at the time. And so with that being said, she was kind of skulking around the house, not really paying attention to what we were saying, and trying to get care for the client. So instead of actually just denying service, at that time, because of there being a possible issue with a caregiving situation, the social worker actually kind of bullied the nurse into accepting her into our program. And so it was a kind of a very uncomfortable situation, and that's when the granddaughter informed us that there was possibly going to be a man moving in that was going to help out with the bills. And he was a buddy of hers. And so, we just I've got the paperwork signed and left. So the setting, Pennyroyal Hospice is a nonprofit in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And so what we do is we offer services for those who have 6 months or less to live. And those are kind of our requirements for being admitted into our program. People involved in this case include really the client, the children, the clinical staff, CNAs, RNs, CSWs, LCSWs, MSSWs, the center director, non-clinical staff, and direct support staff. Stakeholders include the client, all clients in the program and their families, staff at Pennyroyal Hospice, Adult Protective Services. So I bring in Adult Protective Services because and I'll share with you at the end of this. I believe that Adult Protective Services should have been called before we ever admitted this client. That would be a recommendation of mine. Just for the possibility there may have been some neglect going on. I know when we arrived for the home visit, the client was actually only wearing a diaper and was uncovered. She is a female client, and just, maybe should have been, I don't know, out of respect, covered up and dressed. She was bedbound, nonverbal. So, there was some question on whether or not she was actually, if this was a normal situation, her being in a state of undress and uncovered. So this case actually took place during the academic year, spring of this year. So my problem would have been that Pinnacle Hospice could face liability issues when they admitted the client to services and were aware that the granddaughter who was going to serve as the primary caregiver was a drug user and was actively using. And I say liability in that, if something happens to the client and we were aware that the primary caregiver was high and on drugs and was a user at the time that we admitted her, that shows some level of liability in itself. So the client, were worried that she would not get the care she deserves because the primary caregiver is a drug user and disorganized, and there is really nothing in writing from the power of attorney that she approved this care, because the primary caregiver was the one that made the phone call to initiate services. Causes and consequences. So the client in this situation, I feel like, is in this situation because the power of attorney, who is her daughter, lives in Lexington, and the only other family member that could take care of her was this particular granddaughter. She was the only one local. They're pretty low income. They survive on the client's disability and Social Security. The granddaughter does not work. Additional causes could be issues, could be that the new resident of the home is also a drug user. The fact that a drug user is the care person of the client is bedbound, needs 24-hour care, is an issue of concern. And the social worker pressured the nurse into admitting the client, once again putting Pinnacle Hospice in a position of liability. So, ideology and values. So I chose, in this particular case, dignity and worth of a person was a value involved in this case. The client never should have been admitted in the current situation. The client deserved better care, or at least a call to APS to report the situation. And the client also deserved to have a care team that showed competence in admitting her and understanding the situation that she was in. I don't know if we called APS, if that would have made a difference, but just trying to get her out of the current situation that she was in, that was apparently not even looked at as an option. I'm not sure that she would have gotten better care as a ward of the state, but it was definitely, it probably was going to be better than what she was getting. Gainers in this scenario were the granddaughter, the daughter, and Pinnacle Hospice. It was all, the benefits were strictly monetary in this situation for all the parties involved. The daughter and the granddaughter was essentially living off her Social Security and disability, the client's Social Security and disability. The daughter is the power of attorney and is the, executor of the will. The will does, I believe include her and the granddaughter. And then Pinnacle Hospice I put as a gainer because because of us being a nonprofit, they take the Medicare payments, and although the client never receives a bill, her actual care could be more or less than what Penal Hospice is actually putting out. So if there is an overpayment, I don't really know how else to put it, but if the client's needs are less than what Medicare pays us, then there is a gain on that. There is a profit made. So that's why I believe it's a monetary thing in this situation. The census is up, and that's what matters. The client is the loser because she will not get the care she needs. Could possibly face elder neglect due to the primary caregiver being a drug user and not capable of making sound decisions. Social cost. I would say that because if APS gets involved, she becomes a ward of the state. I mean, if they can prove neglect, you've got court cases, you've got lawyer fees, you've got, I mean, it kind of goes on and on. If convicted, she could face jail time. If there's liability, if something happens, then there's liability on the part of Penal Hospice. It could also be court cases and fines and whatnot. So there's several different things here that I would say can make a big difference. Recommendations. I wrote that I would have go to the director of Penal Hospice and discuss the reasoning for the social worker admitting the client with a drug user as a PCG. Discharge the client unless there's a new primary caregiver chosen, and make med counts mandatory in this situation. Don't really know what the primary caregiver was high on, but do know that I would not trust her with the pain meds. In the future, make the right decisions by putting the client's needs first instead of the census of Penal Hospice first, to make sure the client is in a safe situation. And in this case, a call to APS would have been necessary to make sure the client was being cared for properly. The client was also laying in the bed, like I said, half naked and uncovered when the team got there, and the home was definitely in disarray. So my questions for the class would be, would you have admitted the client into hospice care knowing that the primary care person, the person essentially taking care of the client 24 hours a day, was using drugs that altered her thinking? And then would you report the social worker to the appropriate person for pressuring the nurse to admit, even though there were possible issues with admitting a client that involved liability on the care team's part? So with that being said, those are my questions for the class. And I would like to once again reiterate that I believe that hospice is liable in this case if anything happens, as well as the social worker, the nurse, the care team in general. I think that it's really, it left kind of an unsavory taste in my mouth knowing that we were leaving that client in the situation we were leaving her in, and not really sure how I would handle it next time. As a social worker, it's been a learning experience of what not to do in this particular case. So I appreciate your time and thank you.